Should I just begin? All right.
It's really hard for people to believe that a country with so much potential could collapse so completely.
Breaking news in our world lead, Venezuela may be on the brink of no return right now.
This is what it's come to in Venezuela. Emergency surgery by flashlight.
A massive shortage of food and aid in the country is leaving thousands of Venezuelans literally fighting for their lives.
Venezuela was once one of the richest countries in the world.
Venezuela's government today ordered schools and businesses closed to counter nationwide power failure continues. Food and gasoline in Venezuela are running out.
People say that what happened in Venezuela could never happen here in America. But I was there. I am an eyewitness. And I want to tell you, think again.
Hundreds of Venezuelans are fleeing the country.
I was forced to leave my land, my family, and my country behind. Now, I want to tell you.
In the year 2017, I was texting with one of my best friends after arriving from a peaceful demonstration against the Maduro regime. Suddenly he said to me, "Hey ma'am, there is a group of police officers standing right in my front door. What should I do now?" I read this text message and I said to him, "Well, do not open the door, go hiding, and remain quiet." But after this, I never received a single text message back from him, just a terrifying silence. My name is Jorge Galicia. I am a 26-year-old Venezuelan political activist, and also I am an asylum seeker here in the US. And I'm about to show you a couple of videos of my homeland, one from the year 1970, and the other one from Venezuela nowadays.
We have some breaking news in our world lead, Venezuela may be on the brink of no return right now. Violence and bloodshed erupting in the streets as both sides accuse the other of attempting a coup. Self-proclaimed Venezuelan President Juan Guaido is calling for Venezuelan citizens and members of the military to join him in taking control of the country from socialist dictator Nicolas Maduro, who stands accused of holding a sham election and illegally ignoring the National Assembly. I want to warn our viewers, we're about to show some graphic video of the violence that's taking place in the streets of Venezuela today. You can see members of the military who back Maduro literally mowing down protesters in the street today. As CNN was broadcasting those images, the network was taken off the air by the dictatorial Venezuelan government, and at this point has not been put back on in that country. This afternoon,
So how did we go from the very first video that you just saw on this screen, where Venezuela is being shown as a nice place to live in and as a nice place to be young, to the second video where you saw all of this political violence and where young people just like me and all of you are being hit by a military truck in the middle of the road? How does that happen? Well, today my mission is to try to give an answer to that question, but first of all, I'd like to share my own personal experience of how it is to live under the Venezuelan dictatorship. I grew up in a middle-class family. Certainly we were never rich, but I am convinced that in the past we used to have a pretty happy life, a decent one. My family and I used to go to restaurants like the one you're seeing on the screen. I used to have the latest versions of my favorite video games, great birthday parties every year when I was a child. It was a pretty good life. But then, and thanks to the collapse of the system, this situation changed almost completely. To the point where, for example, in my house, we don't even have constant water supply anymore. So me and my mom needed to go to certain place in Caracas, fill up some big water containers like the one you're seeing on the screens, and bring those back home in order to do the regular activities that need to be done at home. Electricity was constantly failing. 3 years ago, we had a massive blackout in the entire nation. It was completely terrifying. I was already living here in the United States, but you know, I was super scared because it was like if the whole country was dead for several days because, of course, without electricity, there's no internet connection. There were no communications. I didn't have a clue about my mom, my grandparents. It was really a really horrible situation. And even food is really hard to come by. Only, 4 years when I was still living in Venezuela, one of my main desires in life was to be able to taste again a piece of pizza or hamburger because unfortunately all of those things became luxury to me. Here are a couple of pictures of myself. I don't know if you can notice any difference. The one that says Socialism is from the year 2018. The other is more recent. You can see that I gained a little bit of weight once I moved here to America. And that's because when I was in Venezuela, unfortunately, I wasn't eating as much as I wanted to eat. I was never starving, of course, but it wasn't the best situation for me or my family. But do not believe that this whole situation that I'm describing to you is like an isolated case, that this only happened to me and my mom or my family. If you actually compare my own situation and my family's situation with the rest of the Venezuelan population, you might still believe that we are somehow privileged among society, and let me explain to you why. For example, my grandmother, she suffered from high blood pressure problems, and she needs to take a medication on a daily basis in order to control her condition. And well, thanks God, and despite all of the difficulties that we're seeing in Venezuela, we have been able to provide the pills for her. But, well, this is not the case for majority of Venezuelans. We're seeing how thousands of Venezuelans are dying on a daily basis just because they cannot find whatever pill they might need to treat any condition, or they either cannot find it or cannot afford it. And let's not even talk about worse diseases like cancer, for example, because this is how Venezuelan hospitals look nowadays. And of course, you cannot expect to receive any kind of treatment in a place like this. And please keep in mind that this is only one of so many examples that I could show to you today to demonstrate how devastated the nation is. If you read the news about my country, you're going to realize headline after headline how devastated the country is. And because of all of this devastation, we have already seen how more than 6 million people have already left the country. Actually, the current number is 7 million people. It says 4. This is outdated. The United Nations estimates that more than 7 million Venezuelans have escaped Venezuela. We're going to places like Colombia, like Ecuador, like Brazil, of course, like the United States. A lot of Venezuelans are currently traveling through Colombia, Panama, Costa Rica. There is a horrible jungle named the Darien jungle, full of human traffickers, gang members, the dangerous animals, horrible weather conditions. But, well, Venezuelans are just, you know, they'd rather taking their chances than staying at Maduro's Venezuela. But for me, well, the dangers didn't stop there. As I mentioned before, I was a political activist when I was in Venezuela. In the year 2014, I joined the student movement of my university, and I also joined a political party named Vente Venezuela, which in Spanish stands for Come Venezuela. It is a classical liberal political party advocating for freedom of speech, freedom of religion, economic freedom, basically every single value that makes it possible to live in a free and prosperous society. But in Venezuela, in order to do this kind of activism, you have to be a risk taker, and a big one. Because the political police is always out there trying to locate opposition leaders that are trying to do something against the Maduro regime. And please keep in mind that I'm not even talking about violent people like military leaders or rioters. No, I'm talking about peaceful people, songwriters, people on Twitter or Instagram, singers. Anybody who is willing to advocate for whatever they believe in is a target for Maduro's political police. For example, this lady right here, her name is Inés González Árraga. She was sent to prison just because she wrote down some tweets against the dictatorship. They didn't like what she wrote, and of course they captured her. This guy right here, his name is Joshua Holt. He is an American citizen who was doing a missionary trip to Venezuela to help the poor. And because of this, he was accused of being an American spy in Venezuelan soil, and he was sent to prison. And not even judges are free from the repressive hand of the regime. That lady right there, her name is Maria Lourdes Afiuni. And she was sent to prison because she dared to write a sentence. She took a decision against the interest of the dictatorship, and they accused her of being a traitor, and they put her in prison. So as you can see, we don't have a lot of divisions between powers anymore in Venezuela. And well, this is exactly what happened to me and my friend, the one I was talking to you about at the beginning of the conversation. He and I were so deeply involved in these massive demonstrations that were going on in the year 2017 that, well, because of that, my friend was targeted by Maduro's political police. And after these events, his mom reached out to me, and she confirmed to me the worst. He was taken. The police broke into his house in the middle of the night without a warrant, without any kind of legality or due process, and they took him away. And at the moment I found out that this was happening to him, I panicked a lot because I knew for a fact that the next in line in order to be captured was me, because he and I were part of the same team. We were doing exactly the same kind of activism at the same time and location. So if the police knew about his location, they probably knew about mine as well. So I needed to disappear really quickly. And I was sent into a religious place in Venezuela. Of course, I am not allowed to reveal to you the name of the place or the location of the place, and not even the religion that they follow in this place in Venezuela, because I don't want to take any kind of chance of compromising the safety of these people in Venezuela. But I was in there, and I was in total isolation, meaning that I needed to shut down all of my social media accounts, turn off completely my cell phone. I was unable to communicate with anybody outside this place, not even with my mom, nor my dad, anybody. Total isolation. And while I was, well, this was a life-changing experience for me because, well, one day I wasn't a student, probably like many of you here today. I was worrying about my next day exam. I was attending my classes. And all of a sudden, I saw myself involved in all of these police persecution as if I were some sort of criminal. And of course, I was not. But during my time there, I was extremely stressed. First of all, because of my friend, because, well, despite the fact that I wasn't having the best time in my life, I was isolated, I was outside my house. I knew for a fact that he was taking the worst of the situation. He was actually captured, right? I wasn't. And while he was in prison, he was being beaten on a daily basis. He was forced to eat food in really, really bad shape. He was forced to share a cell room with the worst of the Venezuelan population, meaning rapists, murderers, kidnappers, people that you don't really want to be friends with. And while he was going through all of this, I wasn't able to provide any kind of help for him or his family to try to get him out of that place. And I was also feeling a bit guilty because I thought something like, well, if he and I were part of the same team and if we were doing the same things, maybe the fair condition should be that he and I should be holding the same position, right? I didn't like the fact that I was doing better than he was. But I was also worried about myself because I didn't know for how long that hiding situation was going to be in place for me. I was constantly thinking every single night before going to sleep. I was thinking things like, will I ever be able to see my mom again? Will I ever be able to finish my law degree? Will I need to escape through the border, hiding under a truck? Those were the kind of thoughts that were surrounding my head every single night before going to sleep, and it was extremely stressful. But, well, thanks God, after 3 months, 3 really long months, it is kind of easy to say, but it felt extremely long for me. My friend was released from prison, and this also allowed me to resume, little by little, my ordinary life in Venezuela. I never got to be the same after these events. I was, constantly expecting the police to show up in the middle of the night, just the way it happened to him. And thanks to all of this, I just decided to stay away from all of the political activism for a while. Not because I stopped believing in what I believe right now, but because I didn't want to compromise the safety of my family, especially my mom. My mom, she's extremely overprotective. She calls me, I don't know, every 30 minutes, kind of crazy. But imagine for someone like her to not be able to know about me for 3 months. She didn't have a clue where I was, how well or bad I was eating, how good or bad I was doing. And she almost lost her mind during this period of time, and I didn't want her to go through the same all over again. So, as I said, I decided to stay away from all of the activism. And then in the next year, 2018, I managed to finish my law degree, thanks God. And once I finished my law degree, I applied to participate in a leadership program named Project Arizona, which is a leadership program being held at Arizona State University. I was selected to be part of that, and well, that's the reason I was able to leave Venezuela and come here. I was supposed to go back to Venezuela on May 1st, 2019, but while I was doing this program at ASU, this was also happening in Venezuela. I don't know how many of you remember this news, but basically Juan Guaido was being recognized as the legitimate president of Venezuela by several nations following the lead of the United States. And well, thanks to these events, Venezuela went into the top of the news. Everybody was talking about Venezuela in 2019, a bit similar to what you're seeing right now with Ukraine, maybe. And because of all of this, I started to receive a lot of attention from people in Phoenix. I mean, local media in Arizona, student groups at ASU, political groups, people who wanted to know more about what was going on inside of Venezuela. So basically, I became a source of information for many people here in the United States. And well, thanks to that, I just decided to resume my activism while I was here. And thanks to that decision, I decided to claim asylum here in America, because I know for a fact that if I return to Venezuela under these very same circumstances, I'm going to end up in some prison, and I don't want to go to prison, right? But anyway, how did it all start? Did it all begin in 1999 when we first elected Hugo Chavez as our president? Or maybe we actually have to look even further into the past to understand the actual causes that led Venezuela into all of these political and humanitarian disaster? Because while I was doing this program at ASU, I used to talk a lot with progressives in the room. I used to say to them things like, hey, I know for a fact that all of you have the best intentions for your country. You want the best outcome, but I am convinced that your political ideas might create the very same environment that led Venezuela into all of these political and economic nightmare, right? And every time I said this to them, they used to reply by saying something like, no, man, you don't really know what you're talking about. The progressive movement is not advocating for the very same policies followed by Maduro and by Hugo Chavez in Venezuela. And the first time I heard this argument, I stopped for a while and I thought to myself, well, you know what? These people may actually have a point, bless you. Because if we're going to be honest about these topics, we have to admit things like, for example, Hugo Chavez came from the military, that he confiscated thousands of private businesses inside of Venezuela, that he created a paramilitary group named Colectivos, which is basically a group of civilians carrying long weapons and terrorizing society across the streets to avoid any kind of political opposition. He incarcerated many of his political opponents. He even murdered many of his political opponents. So in that sense, I do believe that the progressive movement as a whole might not be necessarily the same to Chavez and Maduro, right? But let me ask you once again, how did it all start? What did we have even before Hugo Chavez and Nicolás Maduro? Did we have an open economy with a balanced budget, or maybe we had something much more similar to the kind of welfare state that progressives are advocating for here in America? And well, in order to answer this question, let's locate this talk for a while during the decade of the 70s. Until this decade, Venezuela used to be doing really well economically. We used to have the greatest GDP in the entire Latin American region. We used to have better economics, a better economy than countries like Spain, like Israel, like China, like Greece. At some point, Venezuela even was the fourth biggest economy in the entire world. So, as I said, Venezuela was doing pretty well. But then, in the year 1975, under the leadership of this guy, Carlos Andrés Pérez, two things happened that completely reshape our history until today. The first of those things that happened was the nationalization of our oil industry. I don't know how many of you know, but Venezuela has the largest oil reserves in the entire world. And during this time, we used to be one of the main oil producers of the world. And the second thing that happened was that we saw a major boom among the oil prices in the global market, because there were a lot of conflicts in the international arena. And well, because of the combination of these two factors, the Venezuelan government started to spend much more, because they started to receive a lot of new resources that they were not used to receive in the past. And because of this, well, this guy decided to tackle the problem of poverty and inequality by creating a bunch of new social programs and subsidies. For example, one of the things that they did during this time, free college for everybody. The government created a social program designed to grant scholarships to any Venezuelan who wanted to pursue studies at the university level. The only requirement to receive one of these was to receive, again, an admission letter from any major university, even around the world. And because of this, we saw thousands of Venezuelans going to study to the very best universities of the world for free. None of them was required to pay back to the state a single penny, and it didn't even matter whether they graduated or not. Free healthcare for everybody. The government built more than 20 public hospitals during this time. And basically any Venezuelan, regardless of their socioeconomic condition, could go there, and they would have received free medical attention. You could be poor, you could be rich, it didn't matter. All you needed to do was to enter into one of these facilities. And even gasoline was being subsidized during the time. Venezuela has always been famous for having the cheapest gasoline rates among the entire world, but this was never because of free market and competition, but because of this huge governmental subsidy. But what happened next? Well, in the year 1979, this huge boom among the oil prices that I talked to you about came to an end. And because of this, three major consequences happened that, as I said, reshape our history until today. The first of those consequences, the appearance of inflation, major levels of inflation for our first time in our modern history. And of course, this is something completely sad because the Bolivar, our national currency, used to be one of the most stable currencies in the entire world, but this came to an end during the 80s. And why did this happen? Well, because politicians were so committed to the idea of not making any single cut to the existing social programs and subsidies. And even beyond that, many of them were elected under the promise of expanding even more the social programs and subsidies. And of course, the only way to do this without a huge oil revenue was through printing new money out of nowhere, borrowing more money out of the international market, raising taxes. And thanks to all of this decision making, as I said, we saw a lot of inflation. And what inflation means is, like, for example, if you go to a restaurant today to get a hamburger, you're going to find that hamburger for, let's say, 4 bolívares. But if you go into the very same hamburger a week later, you're going to find the very same hamburger for, I don't know, for, let's say, 8 bolívares. And while this is happening, your salary is remaining on the very same position. So Venezuelans were becoming poorer and poorer with the pass of the time. And the drama of this is not only happening with burgers. This is happening with housing, with medicines, with every single product provided by the economy. The second consequence that we saw was the appearance of a culture of dependency. In the year 1989, Carlos Andrés Pérez decided to run again for a second presidential term, and he won the re-election because a lot of people inside Venezuela thought something like this. If he was the mastermind behind all of the great social programs and subsidies, and if the economy was actually working pretty well under his first administration, maybe if we bring him back again to power, he's going to find a way to bring back all of those years of prosperity that we were used to, right? But even though he won the election, surprisingly enough, he came with new ideas to power. He and his team realized that the levels of spending in Venezuela were no longer sustainable. So he and his team decided to pursue some reforms that were actually pointing in the right direction. He tried to reduce many of the social programs he created during his first administration. He also tried to reduce many of the subsidies. He was basically trying to unwalk the path that he took during his first 4 years in power. But well, guess what? It was already too late. Venezuelans were already used to the idea of living out of government assistance. And the very first day after he announced the reforms, this happened, the Caracazo Revolt, one of our most violent episodes in our modern history. Thousands of Venezuelans went to the streets like crazy to riot against the government, to loot private businesses, to produce all kind of chaos. And unfortunately, the government was forced to send out military forces because even the police was participating with the looters. And because of the clashes between the military forces and the population, we saw how hundreds of Venezuelans lost their life during these events. And the third and last consequence that happened was the appearance of Hugo Chavez himself. In the year 1992, he tried to overtake the government by the use of force. He failed, but his attempt gave him a lot of popularity among Venezuelans because he was basically rooting for those ideas that were already popular among society. He was telling people things like, hey, if you're seeing cuts to your social programs and your subsidy, it is only because of the corruption of the political sector and because of the greed of the capitalistic sector. And according to him, Venezuela was endlessly rich, so everybody was entitled to receive all kinds of social programs and subsidies. And, well, as I said, many people in Venezuela believed in this message. Later, this is something that I cannot understand how we let that happen, but another administration later gave him a presidential pardon, which basically saved him from even going to trial, to court. He never faced a single consequence for committing the crimes that he did. He tried to overtake a democratically elected government. A lot of people died during this attempt. And as I said, he never paid a consequence for doing that. And because of this pardon, he was allowed to participate in the 1998 elections. He won, and well, as a president, he managed to, as I said, confiscate thousands of private businesses inside of Venezuela. He created this paramilitary group. He incarcerated many of his political opponents, murdered many of his political opponents. He changed the name of the country. He changed the flag. He rewrote completely the Constitution. And now, after more than 22 years, we have not been able to remove the system that he created and that now endures under the leadership of Nicolás Maduro. So yes, of course, I would never say to you that the progressive movement in America is exactly the same to Chavez and Maduro, but I could definitely say to you that if their political ideas get to be implemented, they might create the very same environment that led Venezuela into the appearance of people like Maduro and Hugo Chavez. It worries me a lot to see how the levels of spending in this country keep going up and up and up, regardless of which political party is controlling the federal government. We see how Congress and the presidency keeps flipping between Democrats and Republicans, but apparently this doesn't even matter anymore because the debt keeps growing, the deficit keeps growing, the spending keeps growing, and I am convinced that if we don't find a way to put a break into all of this massive spending, keep in mind I'm not even showing all of the COVID spending, but if we don't find a way to put a break into all of that, we are going to see ourselves in a really, really bad economic situation in the future. Will we end up like Venezuela? Well, maybe or maybe not, but we could end up like places like Argentina, like Greece. History is full of examples of societies that collapsed because they were unable to control their levels of spending on time. So again, if I were you, I would definitely avoid voting for politicians that offer me free college tuition or free housing or free whatever, because as you just saw, we used to have all of these in Venezuela even before Hugo Chavez, but it was never free for us. It costed billions of dollars and ultimately our own freedom and democracy. So thank you all for coming. Thank you for inviting me today. Feel free to follow me on social media if you wish, and now we can have a conversation.
Something about changing the name of the country. What was the original name?
The original name was United States of Venezuela, and the new name is Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. And the flag, he had an additional star. Actually, this is the new flag. It used to have 7 stars. He had an 8th star, and he changed like the